Welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. My name is Austin Chadwick and co-host is Chris Lucian. And today we're again very excited to have back Mary and Tom Poppendieck. We had a fantastic conversation with them last time, talking about outcomes, not outputs, and then responsible leader or single-threaded leader, responsible engineer, and a champion. And as if you saw that previous episode, which we'll put in the show notes, we had some follow-up questions. So this is the second instance of the episode to go through some of those follow-up questions and discussion. But before jumping in, just in case someone hasn't seen the previous episode, Mary and Tom, can you both introduce yourself, starting with Mary?
Sure. I'm Mary Poppendieck, and I've started programming in 1967, so you can do the math. When I was a junior in high school, I've worked at various places, mostly as in engineering departments, programming equipment, and at 3M, I did process control for great big roll good processes. Also was an IT manager in a manufacturing plant, and did some corporate work with other manufacturing plants. And then retired at the end of '98 and started writing books. And what I tried to do was write about how to bring the concepts of lean that we used in our manufacturing plant into the software development world.
I'm Tom Poppendieck. I'm a physicist. As a physics professor, I taught, among other things, Pascal and machine language programming back in the 70s and early 80s. I spent time as a systems engineer, first with Honeywell and then as a consultant. Retired when Mary did in about 2000 and have been pursuing this retirement hobby ever since.
Right on, right on. Well, it's great to have you both back. And I have to say, when I watched back the previous episode, it spurred on some other conversations, with team members and stuff. And I really learned a lot from it. And I really liked what you were talking about. I'll eventually go to one word, but I know you were talking about like a champion on a team, a single-threaded leader, a responsible engineer. And I really like a lot of the things you're saying. But there's one area that raised a lot of questions for me. So hence all the stickies and notes I took last time, which was on the plurality of those nouns. So I noticed that it seemed to be intentional that those nouns were singular as opposed to plural. Yes. Yeah. And so I thought that would be a great, rich area to talk about, because just to share from my experience real quick, I've seen successful teams where it was singular. There was, a responsible engineer who was the champion. I've also been on effective teams where it was multiple people, you know what I mean? And so, what's your experiences and what's your take?
And the teams where you had multiple people, were you running into lots of really tough problems?
Yes.
And whoever happened to be the most knowledgeable took over? Would that be sort of what happened?
Well, yeah, it depends what you mean by take over, yeah.
So let's pretend you hire an engineering firm to do something. We are having a solar roof installed on this house, okay? And we have a solar engineering company doing very complicated stuff, including interacting with the utility, making sure that we got our permits and our funding and our rebate stuff back from the electrical company, all the panels on order, we have to have new electrical stuff in the garage and stuff like that. And you know what? I have one contact and I like that. So if you look at a team from outside and the team is doing very complicated stuff for somebody, that somebody probably would like to know who they need to interact with in order to answer questions and make sure stuff gets done. And from that perspective, there is a person inside of the team. Things may shift around. If there's a really complicated problem and there's a competent leader, that competent leader will turn the problem over to the most knowledgeable people. But on the outside, when you have somebody struggling with a complex engineering problem, you like to look at the team and say, who do I talk to? Not let me guess who I'm supposed to talk to.
The size of the team, the size of the problem matters a lot. As Mary suggested, there should be one overall responsible person, but that one person cannot possibly be knowledgeable enough or keep track of sufficiently detail to provide the leadership for the entire effort. Often it's a technical issue. In the manufacturing world, the details of manufacturing, the details of engineering, the details of marketing and design, the details of sales, the details of supply chain and all the rest of that are beyond the knowledge of any one person. So each of those areas has to have people that are knowledgeable and capable in those areas. The lead person makes sure that all of the decisions that are made at all the different levels coordinate, that they work together, that they end up meeting the overall impact and outcome that's desired for the whole work. But within each subdomain, there needs to be a different level responsible for that subdomain.
I have another way to think about it. Think about bands, all right? Now, if you go see a jazz band and they have 4 or 5 people, what you'll notice is from song to song, a different person steps up and does the countdown and gets everybody started. But if you have a band with 30 instruments, you will have a conductor. And every so often, the conductor will turn the thing over to a lead singer or a lead violinist or something like that. But basically, you have a conductor to keep all 30 people in sync. And it's not really optional because there are too many people. It's really optional when there's only 5 in your jazz band. So that's another way to think about it. If you are doing something that requires coordination over more than just a very small handful of people, almost every discipline out there appoints a leader. Every engineering discipline, musicians, you name it, army units, there's a leader. There's a responsible person.
Nice, nice. And I might kick it to Chris here because he has more duration of experience on what I'm about to share. But yeah, so to be real transparent, the examples I had in mind where it was responsible engineers in the plural sense was teams that were in between the size of 3 and 12. So depending upon whatever case I'm thinking of at that moment where I saw it go well. And so things that that challenge of who to talk to when there was not an assigned point of contact, and who, so to speak, sets the tempo for the jazz band, right, at a meeting or something like that. We've been running experiments with that, and so one of the things we'll do is we'll have a rotation board for who facilitates the next meeting with this product person or this customer or the next this or that. And then as far as communication goes, usually we'll direct feedback to a group, either email or group chat kind of thing. And then if something new comes in, the team will get together and discuss, and then people will rise and say like, hey, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to pair off with this person. We're going to work on it, or, a mob will take it or something like that. But I know, Chris, you have a longer history of dealing with the problem of responsibility is given to a team as opposed to a single person, and how all the logistics are worked out. Did you have anything to add in there?
Yeah, I do think that that sort of job, that point of contact can be reimagined, especially in like a digital remote world. And so, the last 5 years or so, the experiment has been to, essentially have groups of people responsible for these things and making all that information available. And I think a lot of it has to do with diligently, making sure Kanbans exist for every funnel of requests and things along those lines, right? So there's a level of, retrospection happening. So for example, I think that facilitation of the meetings, that example that you used, Austin, that came through retrospectives, right? It was like, okay, one person from the outside of the team is becoming really highly dependent on one person inside the team for all of their updates, all their information, all the technical discussion. And so that also kind of like creates, maybe that single funnel, which can be a joy to work with, but also may end up being a little bit of a silo, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
and so if you're dealing with turnover or something along those lines, then making it so that the person from the outside has experience talking to multiple people. That was a little bit of where some of those things were implemented, kind of the internal chaos monkey sort of thing. So rather than doing what Netflix does to servers, as far as chaos monkey goes, shutting them down randomly to make sure that their production keeps going, we do the same thing with people. We rotate them,
Nice.
right? And so it's kind of an interesting experiment, and it does seem to work and be effective. And obviously we're still experimenting towards that. So I don't know if that's what you're getting at, Austin, but that is a little bit of
The experience that your customers have
yes,
is not just a software interaction experience.
yeah,
It is a hardware interaction. It is a software interaction. It is a support interaction. It is an upgrade interaction. And the overall experience that produces the outcome that they're paying you money for is not just software. So you have to be thinking larger than just software teams. You have to be thinking in terms of the entire product team.
yeah.
And that is a little bit different problem than optimizing creation and maintenance of software.
And I think that's a really important distinction here for this discussion. So
That's your concert band rather than your jazz band.
yeah. And it's kind of interesting because different organizations have very different makeups. And so I've seen organizations where hardware, firmware, software are all kind of part of the same team. And I think that that's a little bit of what you had kind of been talking about, right? And then I also see organizations where they're all separate teams and have handoffs to each other, right? Which is like, kind of fundamentally not necessarily the lean way to go about it. But
Certainly not.
yeah, absolutely. And so totally acknowledging that in scenarios, and I think our scenario that we're talking about, they are, more or less separate teams. And so there's kind of like this overarching goal of, connecting to the hardware and passing things between groups. But so maybe these are just two different things that we're talking about, right?
Well, I would like to acknowledge this worry that you have is a big concern of mine, and that is a single point of contact that everybody must go through, then becomes a very narrow view upon both the technical side and the customer side. And the job of who is ever the responsible person is to get the people in touch with the problem, as opposed to funnel the problem through them. And if you see the job that way, and I remember when I was a champion at product teams at 3M, the whole game was to move technical people to talk to lead customers, to move the team members and get them in direct contact with the problem. And to make that happen required a person to set up the meetings and organize the logistics and stuff. But if you have a single person, that's a funnel. And this is very easy to degrade into that situation. If you have one person, then you have a problem. I totally agree.
And so that person almost becomes like a broker almost to all these incoming interactions for the team are
If they see their job as being the funnel rather than the person that connects the problem with the people who are going to solve it.
Yeah.
So in my imagination, it's the person who's connecting the right people with the issues that they have to face and making sure that everybody sees the issues and can act on them with their individual expertise.
Yeah.
So creating more channels rather than becoming an individual channel. But I can see how the same name, same title can degenerate easily into the wrong kind of responsible person. Yeah.
Yeah, because you
Definitely can see that.
the risk there exists there, like the ivory tower architect kind
Mhm.
of archetype, right?
And that
so,
can
yeah.
happen. So there's that really has to be guarded against, but one can go too far
Sure. Yeah.
on both sides here. So this is where's your happy medium?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think maybe this is less of a singular versus plural, with the responsible engineer singular versus responsible engineers plural. And maybe it's a mindset thing. So I'm trying to put the two together. So one of the books I've been reading recently is Turn This Ship Around. And one thing that I saw that you were talking about, Mary, was that even if the person is in an official leadership position, their role isn't to, like you said, be the funnel or be the one who, just decides everything, thinks of it all themselves, and then hands out little tasks for everybody, right? Instead of leader follower, it's leader, right? So they're trying to raise up, they're trying to make those channels, they're trying to do those things. So maybe even if someone was in this kind of role, but then they made sure that they were growing up and raising up other leaders or other responsible
To me, that is the job of a leader.
Right.
And that was what I learned when I was a leader in training, is that your job is to, what I was told was, you are one person. You can do just this much. You have just as much capability and ideas. And here are 8 more people. And your job is to leverage the smarts and intelligence of all 8 of those at the problem to be solved, not just yours. And the better you do that, leverage all of their intelligence and skills at that problem, the better you are. And with that mindset, there were leaders, but their job was to make sure that the group that they were leading, every one of them had opportunity to reach their maximum potential.
A further condition was that you'd never get a promotion unless you had prepared one of the people in your group to replace you.
Oh, yeah.
That is pretty strong.
Yeah, and that's like a big thing, I think, in succession planning in general, is that, and I think a lot of organizations don't really think about succession planning in that way. And so I think that,
we learned that when we were first line supervisors.
Yeah.
You want to get promoted, figure out who's going to take your job.
Yeah.
Make sure they're good at it.
The military has always done that because you never know when the top person in the group is going to depart.
Yep.
So when you're thinking of singular, you also have to be very careful what you mean by leader.
Yeah, 100%. Well, that was great. That really answered my question and helped a lot. And and so maybe this is a good time to transition to the next topic, which was, I think you started to hit on a little bit, Tom, where you said, we have to think of the whole value stream, right? And not just software, so if you're in a domain that requires more than just software, which is one me and Chris find ourselves in often. And so the thing that I struggle with lately, and maybe this will just be a therapy session for me a little bit, but is when there are inherently there's dependencies for the whole value stream that are inherently slow, right?
Yep.
Hardware
is that way.
What's that?
Hardware is that way. I lived in that world most all my career.
Yes. Yeah. So they're like, we're dealing with one right now where we can turn around the software real fast, but what people say with the pandemic, supply chain issues, right? Whatever. So a hardware part is on back order for months, right? And so so part of me looks at the value stream map and feels guilty. And then part of me is like, I can't do anything about that.
But you probably can.
Yeah. But go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So this is a classic hardware software system problem.
Right.
And there are classic solutions known to people who deal with very large scale systems. Mm-hmm. And they boil down to what I like to call is integrating events. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you take a project that's yay big, right, this big, you want to divide it into maybe 6 pieces. So if it's 2 years, it's like every couple months or every 3 months or something like that. No more than 1 to 6 weeks, 2 months, 3 months, something like that. And you schedule a demonstration 2 months from today. And this is what we are going to demonstrate. And all the teams from all the hardware, the software. Now, should the hardware not have a piece of hardware, then there's going to have to be an agreement on, well, we're going to simulate that or something like that. Typically, simulation of hardware before it arrives is really common. And most people that have long delayed stuff routinely simulate all of their hardware, and so that they can just drop it in and have tests on the hardware when it arrives to make sure it behaves the way their simulation expects it to. So you have an event that's 2 months from now, and it won't move. It's going to happen 2 months from now. And the objective of that event is to do this, to prove this. Just take like a Tesla test of a booster rocket. It's going to go up in the air. We want it to try to land on a ship or something like that. Now, everybody knows their part in that next event, what their team, their component is expected to do. They're expected to understand its role. And they have to come up with some way of making that thing work. Maybe it's not the final way, so maybe there has to be some way of simulating or something like that. But everybody has a role in that event. And then you have the day when the event happens and you see what goes wrong. You actually are not looking for perfection. You're looking for, when we put it all together, what's going to break. And that's why all those rockets exploding as the SpaceX tested their boosters was considered the way you do good engineering. So these integrating events are when you test everything. So I'm going to give you an example. We were at a company in the outskirts of London that was doing massive warehouse automation for home delivery of food. And they had just gotten a contract for building warehouse for a big food chain in the US. They'd only done their own up to that point. It was a sort of a you bet your company kind of a thing. They had 18 months and they had the software group, which I was working with. And then there was a hardware group that they had to interact with. And to put it, to make it even more interesting, the person who'd invited us to talk about, agile stuff had been fired, and this was his last day. So I was talking to an essentially skeptical group of people that didn't even invite us. And I was listening I said, well, what's your big problem? And they've defined this problem. And so I looked at all of them and I said, okay, so 18 months from now, you bet your company you're going to have an automated warehouse up and running in the US. And as far as I can tell, you don't have a plan on exactly how you're going to make that happen. And they said, yeah. Nor do you have a lot of good interactions with your hardware people who are intimate with making that happen. And they said, right. I said, okay, so that's your problem. And they looked at us and they said, well, what do you recommend we do? And I said, classic hardware software engineering says you should have integrating events. Since it's 18 months from now, you should start no more than 6 weeks apart, maybe 30 days, and have something you schedule like tomorrow you get together and you decide, what are we going to do in 6 weeks? What are we going to prove? Okay. And it's got to be a hardware software integrating, across the board thing that everybody agrees on. And then in 6 weeks, you're going to make it, test it, and see how it works. And then at that point, you see what you learn, you schedule the next one, and you keep going like that through okay. So towards the end of that 18 months, I got an email from one of the people that we had been talking to there. And he said, I just want you to know. And I didn't explain it for very well. What? Couldn't have been 5 minutes when I explained the concept. And they said, we just want you to know that after you met with us, we scheduled an integrating event for 6 weeks later. And it went interesting and well. So we scheduled one for 6 weeks after that. And it was incredible how far we got because of that. And right now we have no idea how we could work any other way. And we're going to make our deadline. And it's because you force integration across all of the systems early and regularly, and you don't change the deadline. Okay, there's no, I don't know if I can be done. That's not the game. It's, we all agree that at this point in time, we're going to do something to make this true. Might not be the final thing, we're going to do something to make this true. And typically when you're under the gun like that, you have a plan A, a plan B, you know, maybe even a plan C. One you're sure will work if the other one doesn't, and one that's kind of aggressive and you'd like it to work, but you'll always have something to take to the demo because the demo isn't going to not happen. The deadline doesn't move. And the integrating events like that are really classic hardware software integration mechanisms, especially when the departments are not necessarily the same. And again, they're usually orchestrated by a principal engineer that schedules them and gets everybody together to decide on what's going to happen at the next one. But the actual event is like everybody has to talk to each other because you've got to know what your component does and how it's going to interact with the other components to prove whatever it is you're trying to prove at that integrating event. So as you go along the large scale systems with disparate teams, you need to be scheduling integrating events that lead up in the end to having the thing working. And you don't expect perfection at an event. You expect discovery. You expect maybe things won't work. You also do not allow people to say, well, we can't be ready. That's not a concept. You will have something, okay? You have something to, however weak and small, however much of simulation rather than the real thing, there has to be something to prove that it works. So if you're a software team and you know you won't have hardware, you have to have a simulator. Because otherwise you can't do your piece. And I know that when I was doing testing for our installations of our big roadwoods process control systems, I just instinctively built simulation for every single thing that my system was supposed to do, because I wouldn't hook to the hardware till it shipped, like, 4 months before startup. And I'd go there for the last, 6 weeks or so, and I didn't want to stay any longer. I had little kids at home. So I made sure that there was nothing about the system that I put together that could possibly have been wrong that I could logically test in any way. And then when it went out there, the only thing that needed to be tested was the kinds of race conditions and stuff that happen when you actually put hardware and software together for real. And the logic was completely tested. So the concept of having integrating events across the system is almost every large scale system that works. It's the classic way that they work. And you have to have somebody that at least puts those events together, describes the objectives, make sure that they happen. And beyond that, you can have the individual groups. But these things have to schedule sort of, you're increasing your confidence in the way the system works, one step at a time, with the steps sort of geared to make sure that by the time you get to the second last one, you've pretty much proven most of the stuff. Yeah. And when you do that, because you have to show stuff long before hardware arrives, you probably can drop hardware in when it comes, because you've proven all of that. Because in order to do the integrated event, you have to simulate stuff. You can't do it otherwise. Yeah. Typically, people do not create simulation of those other guys' stuff. I'm writing the software, what are you going to do with the hardware? I'll test it when the hardware comes. You don't do that. It isn't a concept if you have to have integrating events where you have to prove stuff. And so
it's kind of funny, because I think that everything that you described, I think has been essentially our experience. Even with hardware that pre-existing hardware, I think what you had said earlier with unit testing around the integrations with that pre-existing hardware, that happened kind of naturally, and very similarly hardware that we don't have, almost immediately there's a simulator that's available, and then the integrating events, it's interesting. So we have multiple products, but essentially monthly, there's always a kind of monthly there are integration demos that happen, and often they are with simulators, right? So is there a really interesting thing. So,
are you integrating events by product?
No, every product at the same time will show their current set of integrations. And so,
okay, so what I'm thinking of is a little bit different.
Yeah.
And that is, you think of a product as a thing that's going to be delivered to a customer that has to have these 10 capabilities.
Yep.
And your integrating events are testing capability 1 and 2 in the first event, capability 3 and 4 in the second event, 5 and 6 in the third event and stuff. But it's everyone that I know of is geared towards taking the whole system, hardware and software, for a single deliverable customer described, capability product and integrating across that. It's something you might, if you don't do that, you might want to think about.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't, it doesn't happen. It's not scheduled based on where people think they will be. It's on a regular cadence, and it happens no matter what. It always.
But you're showing what you can do now, right?
Yes, and there's always it's always
the
something
integrating
new.
events for a large hardware software product are not that.
Mm-hmm.
They're an agreement that in 6 weeks from now we will have this thing across the hardware and software that is a customer capability we need to deliver that we can demonstrate.
Sure.
It's a different concept than here's where I am.
Yep.
Really very different.
And I think whether you schedule it outright like that, or I've also seen it happen, and maybe this is different than what you're saying, but there is a commonality. I see that as soon as possible, you are doing integration, right? Even if it's just like,
well, yeah,
a half put together piece of hardware with some of the things there. We're doing integration as soon as possible.
Okay.
Finding out the unknown. Yeah.
Remember, part of the question was, maybe you didn't ask it, but part of the question that I thought you were going to ask was, how do you deliver reliably against deadlines? Okay. And so if I assume a deadline is, I'm going to deliver this capability to this customer on this time, which almost every engineering firm can do. Okay. If you have a contract to build we have systems, road systems that are built, or, systems on our roof or something like that. Okay. There is an idea of when it's going to happen, and an agreement that we will be able to deliver it for this amount of money in this basic time frame. So the question is, how, if you've got this is the capabilities we're going to deliver in this time frame. You can never promise what is impossible. Okay, or what you've never done before, but you can promise what your capabilities allow you to. Okay, we've never done anything like that, but we have the people that have done all of the pieces, and we believe, we used to do brand new control systems with completely different components than ever before, but we did control systems, okay, and we knew how to put in new components. So we would always say it's going to take us 18 months or something like that. Because that's how long a control system takes. Then if you spread out your integrating events along the timeline, you know what you need to demonstrate at each one to show that in 18 months, I'm going to have this much capability proven and deployable. And so what you're doing to hit the deadline is to understand that, first of all, you committed to a deadline because it's not outside the capabilities of the kind of stuff that this capable group of people has done before. We had built control systems for manufacturing plants for a long time, not computerized because that was new at the time, but there was lots of electronics. So we could commit to a deadline, and we could commit to all kinds of new technology, but then we had to prove it out on a cadence.
Yeah.
Where this step was done. If you look at how Toyota does new car lines, that's exactly what they do.
So I think that I think I might see where maybe we're talking a little bit about two different things, right? So
yep, I think so.
I think, Austin, you might be talking about maybe SaaS products, like software as a service, where they're constantly evolving. They're never really unavailable. They're just getting new features all the time. And Mary and Tom, I think you're talking about full-fledged systems that get deployed into kind of maybe a static environment. So in that delivery scenario,
I introduce a new car. I start up a line in a plant. I open a road to traffic. I have my solar system working, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And in that kind of stuff where engineers are going to say, we can do this, it's in their experience, you expect them to tell you when it's going to be done, approximately. And given their capabilities, you expect them to know their workload and how much capability you can put it at. And we expect our solar system to be May.
Yes. And so, yeah, and I think that's the key thing there. So, and I totally agree with you on that, because like, if you've created a delivery system in the past and you're going to deploy a new one in the United States, but you've only done it locally before, you may know, about how long each component part takes, but maybe in the new scenario, you have to assemble all of those component pieces and then engineer specifically for specific constraints. But like, I also think that all translates very well into the SaaS product, but with this idea of an integration cadence where you are targeting new capabilities, and that there will be hardware in the future and firmware, and you may put a simulator and stand up that simulator and prove that it all works together on a regular cadence, and so that cadence can be really good. But while at the same time it's not rebuilding the entire system, it's like developing a new capability that you've never done before, and then making sure that you can deploy it, that those integrations work. And so I think both scenarios are probably accurate but different. Yeah.
And increasingly common these days is digital engineering. And that means that you don't start with a blueprint and a drawing board. You start with digital versions of what you're designing. And the sophistication for both electrical and mechanical hardware design are dramatically a lot better than they were a decade or two or three ago.
Yeah.
You design an entire airplane down to the tiniest detail digitally before you start any actual physical machining. We've seen that in fighter design in Sweden, where the digital simulations were evaluated by test pilots in their flight simulators, and they would trade off different options in their hardware and software design digitally with experienced pilots. And after lunch, they would give feedback on what they had.
Free lunch. That's how they got the pilots to come.
Give feedback, and they would adjust the hardware choices and the operational software choices based on that feedback. And the result is a fighter plane that pilots absolutely love.
Yeah, because you can get that feedback loop and incorporate that into the new designs before everything is all said and done.
Yeah.
Totally agree with that.
Yeah, and I know you got to close it out, Chris, but I will close a little bit on that last question before you do. Is you did help me with the emotional therapy part of it, so thank you. In that, all the things you said are all things that you can take responsibility for and do. And ultimately, it doesn't change the end value stream, right? Because even if I'm iterating quickly against a simulator, against unit tests, it's not putting something in the customer's hands as quickly as our piece of it, can operate. But it's doing everything I can, and that definitely helps.
Yeah,
I actually heard something.
You can't walk away from it. You have to be in sync with the other people and move at their pace. Typically, the hardware pace is going to govern the actual delivery pace, and you have to figure out how to work in sync with that.
Yeah.
But of course, once the hardware is deployed, you can continue updating the software.
Yes.
Yes, that's
The
your software as a
electric
service part.
vehicle market is learning how to do that.
Yeah.
That features come whenever they're ready and the hardware doesn't need to be changed.
Mhm.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I totally see that. And then I think maybe my personal stretch is to take off the software hat and say, hey, let's think about the product as a whole.
Yeah.
And how is there any responsibility I can take to relieve the bottleneck, hardware, software, firmware, whatever, right? And so that is more challenging for someone who's comfortable in a little spot.
Yeah, but if you think about the team the way we talked about it, the team is the team for delivering the product to the customer, and you're
Right.
part of that team. Just because you happen to be doing software doesn't relieve you of the responsibility to help the whole team out to deliver a really good product on time. It's part of your job. It's just part of being on that team. If you think of yourself as just a software team, then you get to walk away and say, well, call me when you're ready.
Yep.
If you're looking at the interaction of your customer with your product and you become aware that they're having real trouble with something and the source of the trouble is hardware, that doesn't mean it's not your problem to make sure that gets fixed.
Yep. 100%. And having that responsibility is super important. And there's lots and lots of developers out there that are now working on IoT that were originally just very software oriented, right? And so,
Oh my gosh, there's another world out here.
It's exploded, in the number of scenarios because, every little thing now has a connected device to it, or at least a mobile app that interacts with the main app. So we are a little bit out of time. So I'll just, I'll kind of bounce off of that idea and say to all of you developers out there who know somebody or are yourself working with IoT, for example, or maybe just some level of hardware software integration, definitely share this episode with them. And Mary and Tom, thank you for both coming on the show again. I know we said this last time, but if there's anything that you wanted to plug or share besides what we already covered, now would be
No, probably not. We wrote 4 books. They might be interesting, but they're also not new. And what we really want you to do is make sure that you do your part to make products that are software empowered, really good products.
Awesome. And so with that, like, subscribe. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.